Hi all, welcome to Proxyclick Connect session, which is beyond the pandemic, making the new world of work, of course. That's what we plan on doing. So today I'm moderating the session. So I'm Henry, I'm the Senior Sales Manager at Proxyclick, currently leading the mid-market and SMB sales team. Luckily for me and you guys, you won't be listening to me for the next hour. I'm joined by a fantastic panel. So of course, I'd like to introduce or get them to introduce themselves this session. So if we can start with Rhea, as you're next on my screen, if you can get started.
My name's Rhea, and I'm a co-founder and a chief customer officer at Lane.
And then let's go down for me. So Gregory.
And so I'm Gregory Blondeau, and I'm the founder and the CEO of Proxyclick, the visitor and employee check-in system.
Lovely. And finally, last but not least, Mark.
Thanks, Henry. Hi, everyone. Mark Hill, the Strategy and Transformation Director at Sodexo, where I've been based for 15 years, working in the UK and Ireland, France and Japan.
Thank you all. So lovely to have you on board today. It's going to be, I think, quite an interesting session. It's quite an open-ended session as well, I think. Lots of topics to discuss, so that should be fun. And well, with an hour to go, I think we should delve straight in. So of course, let's be honest, where are we is because of COVID-19 that we're here. I don't think we can deny that that has really changed workplace and the office as we know it. Obviously, business priorities have changed. They kind of just went, okay, how do we actually work nowadays? And of course, urgent need to go, okay, how do we maintain and continue our business? Obviously, classic models have completely been adapted. We can't just walk into the office and do our 9 to 5 any longer. And of course, that means everybody had to make massive changes. Initially, I think they were planned to be temporary. I think moving forward, those things are going to be more or less permanent, but that's of course up for discussion today. So to get slightly philosophical and pose the first question to you guys, how do you think that extended remote working period, and some of us are still in it, has changed people's minds when it comes to, well, going to the office and the return to the office? I think as that's quite open, maybe how do we start that? How have your companies taken that move forward? Who wants to get started there?
I can hop in on that one.
Cheers.
Awesome. So at Lane, we did exactly that. We tested out working from home for what we thought would be one day. Everybody took their laptops home at the end of the day, and we are still not fully back in the office over a year later. So that's really taught us how to work asynchronously. It's really taught us to value those collaboration moments, those like points of intersection between teams or individuals in the office. And the way that we're addressing this as we start to reopen and return back in is to offer our employees a flexible solution or a flexible option on how they return to work, which is really important for us as we're a workplace experience platform. So we need to have a good work experience for our own company as well.
Makes a lot of sense. And how did you come to flex working? What was the driver there to say, let's do something flex?
I think it was that this year really taught us all that, you know, how we perceive the office and the function of the office has evolved a little bit. And that for some, it is very much a refuge and a place to get work done. For others, it's there just to collaborate or kind of check in on that team and culture aspect. So that depending on your role in the company or even maybe your personal preference, you're going to engage with the office differently. And so we've really thought to look at our office space and treat it differently. It's not just a big room full of desks and boardrooms anymore. We've got to make it more of a destination and more of a productive, collaborative space.
Cool. And I can tell that you're in the office today as well. So that's
I am. It's great.
Are there any similarities, Gregory, Mark? I mean, different types of organizations on both sides. How have you guys posed for it? I mean, we can go to the completely different type of organization with Sodexo. very, 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 yeah, demanding, I think, and how you kind of have to manage those approaches. How have you done it over there?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess our challenge wasn't necessarily flexible working, because in many cases, we're working on client sites anyway, and moving between client sites. So, our challenge, I guess, was adapting quickly to the client's culture, policies, and reaction to the unfolding global pandemic, and making sure that we were a partner in that process to help them through that challenging time, to keep their people as safe as possible over the last 12 months. Another point I think I'd make, based on what you were discussing, was, I think a lot of companies have found that, productivity has been maintained, in some cases increased, with that flexibility and people going the extra mile, quite frankly. A lot of people working from home, realized they were in fortunate circumstances compared to frontline employees, whether they're in the healthcare profession, but also all the engineers keeping buildings going, transportation staff, keeping that infrastructure going. But I think it's come at a cost of mental well-being that's now beginning to emerge. Going to workplace gave people a sense of purpose, sense of community, and a lot of people have struggled, I think, with the lack of that from working from home. Gregory, how have you found that in the Proxyclick team?
So in our case, we have remote working very much in our DNA. As a tech company, a lot of tech companies, of course, have that. We've had remote workers way before COVID. We even have an annual remote working trip where everyone meets in one place once a year to finally meet face to face with all the new people who joined the company. So when we had to flip the switch, it was really easy. Although we thought it would be for 2 weeks, it was really easy to go home and work from home and go to Zoom. So there was no technical challenge or no adaptation needed, no tools that we needed to install to get started. But and I must say that initially productivity increased, and I think now we have months and months of home working. Productivity is going down because there is the fatigue of being every day in front of your screen instead of walking, talking to people, etc. So now we are starting to actually, today we had our meeting to discuss, a management meeting to discuss the return to work plan. So essentially we'll be around 2 days, 2-3 days a week in the office for those based in Brussels, New York, or Singapore. And then for the rest, remote workers, as we were doing in the past, asking them to come at least once a quarter to one of the hubs to meet the team. And so as Ria was saying, it becomes the office becomes much more a destination where you need to attract people with a great working space, attractive office design, quieter space, meeting rooms, interactions, etc. So we're getting ready for it, and as everyone says, 1st of September is the big date where everybody's going back to work, hopefully without another wave facing us after that.
I think that number still depends where you are. I'm seeing in the UK 21st of June is still on a lot of people's agendas. So, I mean, one thing you mentioned there on that side was the different hubs, as you called it there. So different geographies, different hubs. Has there been differences in what you've seen either across your customers or internally as well, in terms of how to get back, how people want to get back? Has there been a difference there, or even in terms of departments, potentially?
I think we've
Well,
seen,
sorry, go ahead.
I think we've seen differences depending on the market. So some markets opened up sooner. And for us, when we work with commercial real estate, office buildings, it also depends on who works in those buildings. So obviously property managers, engineers and security, they were never working from home. They were always in the buildings this whole time. But sometimes the tenants in those buildings can be essential services as well, like the CDC, for example. So it really does vary based on, in the last year, if you're an essential worker or not. And I think as we return also based on the type of work, some work requires you to be a lot more collaborative, a lot more in person, or occasionally for security reasons, you need to be on site in a local office. So it's been a varied approach. And I think the key to everything has been flexibility and adaptability, because we're all still, we're connecting the dots into what we think is going to happen, but nobody really knows yet.
Does everybody agree to that, or different points?
No, I mean, I think I'd agree. The temptation is to look inwards in these situations and to begin to isolate yourself from what's happening around. But I think, in our experience, working with clients all around the world, has reminded us to stay open-minded, to stay connected, to open yourself to diverse thinking, to have an inclusive culture where different and best practices from around the world are incorporated into sort of your global approach to returning to work safely. And I think that's been one of the refreshing and optimistic messages of the last 12 months, is that openness and shift to genuine collaboration between our client organizations and Sodexo, but also our partners like Proxyclick, helping us overcome incredibly complex challenges on a site-by-site basis, with that customization that's needed, exactly as we just heard. So it's relevant for a geography who's experiencing this at a different pace or a different timeline or a different wave that they're in. But that shared knowledge and understanding, I think, has been incredibly enriching for our organization.
I think it's also that, like, the flow of people in and out of these spaces has become even more important and different, because it's not, Monday morning at 9 and then again at 5, repeat during the week are those big influxes of people. With flexible work, the way that you interact and move through a space is going to be different depending on who you are too. And so I think that, understanding of best practices and looking at other markets and how other people have addressed this and trying to see how that will work in your own market is going to be really crucial, because it's changed for sure.
Definitely.
It's kind of a real estate and facilities nightmare, actually, because you don't know who's coming to your office and when. That means you don't know how much staff you need to welcome the people. You don't know how many desks you need. You don't know the food you need to feed them. So that's actually perfect for Sodexo, solving that big problem that organizations have, right?
I wouldn't say quite perfect. I think I would still wish we could rewind 12 months. And there are times that, I certainly wish we were a smaller organization, moving the tanker, so to speak, as an analogy. But, I guess COVID for us didn't change what we needed to do. There were a lot of things that our industry needed to acknowledge and change prior to this global pandemic. And I guess COVID just accelerated that and focused everybody and helped us orientate and see, the end state together. So from that perspective, it's been a good opportunity for Sodexo to collaborate with clients to overcome some pretty deep-seated challenges we had to address the future of the workplace. We were moving to hybrid working, we were moving to more digitalization, but I guess at a more leisurely pace than we are now. And that's thrown up its own challenges, as I'm sure Proxyclick's experienced by working with some of its other clients.
I think one of the challenges there, and as you said, sometimes COVID has just sped up what we were going to do. I think digital transformation is most probably forefront of people's minds, where, COVID-19 was the reason why we actually finally managed to do a digital transformation process. But of course, on the other hand, we have the Zoom fatigue nowadays, of course, of our colleagues and our employees. So I think we all agree here, right, that technology can really help assist in this kind of return to work, in this new world of work. But how do we balance that tech assistance with the let's say psychological or mental effects of the Zoom fatigue? Don't know who wants to try and take that one.
We talk about the words digital
ahead,
overload. Digital overload. I mean, the numbers published recently by Microsoft in March, for instance, on the number of team meetings that have shot up, the emails have gone up, chats, video calls. We've replaced, that commuting time in people's agenda is now a meeting because they, you're free at 8, so we'll put a meeting in your agenda. So I think, I would call it digital overload, and that, creates mental fatigue without a shadow of a doubt. And remember that everybody, we've never had so many people at one point in time all forced to work in that dynamic. You'd expect a transition and help people sort of change their work styles, but they sort of were chucked in the deep end, so to speak, and forced to adapt so fast that there wasn't and hasn't been enough time for reflection on how that should work in the future. And when I speak personally, I went into a meeting into London a couple of weeks ago, and it was incredibly interesting, how people were still interacting with me as if I was still in my box, working from home, waiting for their email, ready to reply instantly. And actually, I was doing a normal day. I was in a board meeting and then at a client site, which is something I've desperately missed. But it was amazing how, the ways that we're working now grated against going back to some in-person meetings. So that balance is going to have to be found again.
And what things would be go ahead, Ria.
I was going to say, we're definitely, I feel like, struggling with this ebb and flow of too many meetings in the company. And on the one hand, there's such an incredible desire for connection with our customers, with other employees. For us at Lane, we've more than tripled our team size during COVID. So we have a vast proportion of our company who've never got to meet each other. So we're always joking like, oh, like how tall is this person? Like where are you? And it's that, but balanced with the fact that you can't just take the way that you work together in an office and then put it on Zoom and it works the same way. You need to really look at more asynchronous work and, working to maybe spend more time setting up a task for somebody to do, because you don't get that someone popping by the desk just to ask a quick question or like that little knock on the door. Do you have a minute? You have to schedule a Zoom call with that person, which is like an incredible amount of friction to having a human interaction at work. And I think, we definitely don't have the solution on Zoom fatigue, but this digital transformation can really help a lot of those other friction points as we're coming back in. So, making it a little easier to come into the office if you're one of those employees that's remote and is coming in once a quarter, and just how do we get them access to the building? How do they know where everything is and how it's working? Or for the employee who's there all the time or a couple days a week. And it's really treating all of those as their own separate, dedicated and important experiences. I think that's that change in mindset that has been accelerated from COVID, the idea that it really has to be a lot more about an experience now. It's not so simple as just, take your meeting and put it on Zoom.
Yeah,
I think we all
and it's
know
interesting
that doesn't work.
Because you touch on another challenge, when you said that knock on the door and that generational divide, because I think, a lot of research is throwing up that sort of some employees have thrived working from home. They got to see their kids more often. They didn't have to sit on a train for an hour and a half. But at what cost to a younger generation coming into the workforce? You said some people in your organization have never even met their colleagues because they joined in COVID. Imagine how hard that must be to connect with an organization and get a sense of where you belong, or to learn from the people around you. as
And
you
I'm
build
in
your career.
the client-facing team, so I'm very biased towards, like, you know, relationship building and personal interaction, and it's so much better to pick up the phone or just, you know, in our case, walk across the street and be like, hello, how can we help? And, you know, not having that opportunity, it takes a lot longer to get people up to speed. You can't just say, hey, follow me as I do this task, or shadow on this call or meeting, because suddenly there's new Zoom faces on the meeting, and you can't really say, okay, everybody ignore Mark, it's his first day. Like, he's here to learn. So a lot of that knowledge transfer has been a lot more challenging.
You know, on our side, we had an hybrid workplace and workforce before the pandemic, and it actually created a problem of communication, because those in the office knew more about what was happening in the company than those working remotely, that we were only seeing on Zoom. And the one good thing of the pandemic is it created a level playing field completely across the organization about information. But of course, the negative part is that the information doesn't flow as well as it should. We had an office reopening party the other day, and I found out so much about what was happening in the company through informal discussions with new team members, or even older team members that have been here for a while, because you get those knock on the door discussions that you didn't have before. But by doing so, I recreated, or I could feel I was recreating a disadvantage to those not in those discussions. So the day after, I had a Zoom to discuss what I had found out, and it's very difficult. And that's going to be a big challenge, I think, going back to the office, is because there will always be people working from home and people in the office. So how do you manage that level of information? And as you said, Ria, I think that asynchronous is a good approach. Publishing, you know, results or meeting notes, but it's also difficult to maintain systematically for an organization.
And I think organizations will need to reflect on their employee value propositions, potentially by generation, to really think through carefully how they remain a workplace, an organization that attracts and retains talent, that does have, you know, a destination, whether that's in an office or a third space, and that helps sort of build experiences that add value to those employees.
Yeah, I think all three of you have touched upon experience, hubs, destinations. I mean, is that what the new office is in your opinion? It's and Mark, you mentioned value there as well when it comes to employees. Is that what the office, the new office, is going to be? Is it going to be that destination? Is it going to be?
Well, I think it's a tremendous opportunity to reimagine, because it's not just COVID related. You know, there's the bigger picture of, you know, sustainable working as well. And I think we were increasingly moving towards a future where we were cognizant of our carbon footprints in our commutes. And the carbon footprint, if you were to calculate it for 20 team members to all come in and be in, you know, the central London office on the same day at the same time, you know, we are becoming more aware of data that helps us inform better decisions. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to rethink that from a sustainability perspective, from a safety, from a collaboration. But without a shadow of a doubt, you know, one of the things that has changed more is people will reflect more on why they're going to the office that day. What is the purpose? What am I getting out of it? What are my team members getting out of it? And how will we make sure that if we are doing this and connecting, we're going to really get value from this session, whether it's team building, whether it's in the collaboration, whether it's in innovation, that there's a lot more intent and design. But at the same time, you know, I do think, you know, employers need to reflect on the different generations, because that might not be the same for people starting out in their career. You know, for them, that there has to be these bumping in the corridor and and learning through osmosis, absorbing a company's culture, learning from, somebody who's been there for 10, 15 years and watching the way they hold themselves in meetings, the way they engage clients, the way they're invited in to contribute at the right moments. That helps build careers and confidence, and builds your ambition about what you want to achieve in the company. So this is why I think it's not as simple as just saying, it will be a collaboration intent to every visit to the office. I think there has to be some nuance there that matches a company's culture.
One of the other key differences, thinking about different generations in work, is also the size and location of somebody's living space. So, we're in Toronto in this office. It's a big city. It's an expensive city. A lot of people live in condos. And, the idea of, just set up in the home office is also your living room and your dining room, and in some cases, your bedroom. And so not having that separation to say, this is my working space, this is my living space. Or alternatively, employees that have young families, and trying to explain to a toddler that, dad is at work right now. We have someone in the office who will say goodbye in the morning, leave through the front door, go around the house and go into the basement through the back door to go to work, so that he can, kind of try to not get interrupted. But I think it's been a year of meeting everybody's pets and children and partners.
Has that employee been rumbled yet?
Yeah.
They peered through the basement window and saw him.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it's only going to last for so long. But, and that's kind of what it is. I think we've, to your point of rethinking our company's values and, how we position this year has made not the idea of just an employee or a coworker. It's like more of humanity has been brought in, because you are, you're working from your home, which is a much more personal space than your office or your cubby when you are in your working space. So we're gaining a lot more insight that way. I think it's really great.
Important. So we talked a lot about like the value proposition. Obviously, value proposition for a company that comes from leaders, right? Unfortunately, that can't come from the bottom down. That's from the top. Unfortunately, we have got some great leaders in this meeting today. How do you think that yourselves and other leaders can kind of help employees come back to work?
I think first and foremost, it starts with safety. You must be absolutely sure that you've taken every measure you possibly can to protect the safety of your employees returning to the workplace. So whatever companies do, for me, it starts there. And then following that, it's exploring what as a company you are trying to achieve, what are your strategic objectives. There'll be businesses out there who will look to reduce their footprint, their office footprint, who want to embrace more flexibility. Maybe they didn't have any prior to COVID. So there's a great opportunity for them to look at, introducing 2 days a week working from home. But what I would say as a leader is not to open the floodgate. I wouldn't go for a free-for-all tactic of choose any day that you want to come in or not to the office, because I tell you what will happen. Everybody will come in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you will be squeezed in like sardines, and nobody will come in on a Friday or a Monday potentially, and you'll have empty real estate. So the business didn't win, the employees didn't win, safety certainly didn't, because you're over capacity in certain days of the week, and you've sort of not achieved some of those strategic objectives. So I think it starts with, what are you trying to do as a business, and then working backwards to how you're trying to overlay that with your employee value proposition.
I think you answered that extremely well. However, how as a company can you make sure that not everybody comes in on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and nobody comes in on Monday and Friday? How does that work for you?
Yeah, but first they need, you need technology, and you can't manage a new world of work without technology. It's quite a challenge, because you need to know who's coming, You need to know that you haven't reached full capacity, that they've booked a desk, that they've answered whatever questions that need to be asked regarding safety. So you need that. And so I wouldn't be surprised that you wouldn't give incentives to teams or to people to schedule their team meetings on a Monday or on a Friday. So we had, before the pandemic, we had the Friday lunch. We are restarting the Friday lunch on the first week of July, so that we have people coming on Friday. But it was also the case back then. We did the Friday lunch to attract people in the office on Friday. So maybe we'll do a Monday lunch as well, so have those 2 days covered. I don't know. But beyond that, beyond those perks, you need to give a purpose, of course, for people to come. You need those interactions, and you're right, Mark. I think that each generation will want different things from the workplace, and so you need to be able to give it to them. And that's probably the biggest challenge coming ahead of us, especially for more traditional organizations that were in cubicles with floors of desks, all the same. Changing to that new world of work will be quite a challenge.
I think it's also the communication from, when you're a leader in a company, you're really looking at that big picture. You talked about it earlier, like the idea of the tanker, and you're thinking far in the future and you're planning in advance and you're looking high level, which isn't how many people who work in the company, that's not the view that they have. For them, tomorrow is Wednesday, they've got these meetings, they've got this project they have to get done. So communicating down that, we can't do a free for all, and it's not because we're mean. It's because, we want to ensure that our sales team can interact with our marketing team. So we're going to make sure that those teams are going to have some overlap in the office, and communicating the whys behind having some of that structure there. And at Lane, our implementation team has probably set up thousands of bookable desks for our customers in the last couple months, because that's, really how it's working. And the idea that certain teams will be in on certain days, they're able to book in their hot desk. And the office footprints themselves are kind of splitting into, there are some employees who are ready to go back every day and be in the office. I personally am one of those. So, we're making space for those employees as well. It's like you can have your dedicated desk and workspace. And for those who are more flexible, booking in and just trying to communicate the why behind these decisions that are being made, and acknowledge that everybody has an idea of how they want to go back. And we need to look at this across a whole company of, dozens or hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of individuals, and put together a plan that is going to work best. And just that communication to make sure that it reaches everyone in the company so that they understand.
One thing there you mentioned. Oh, so go ahead, Mark. Go for it.
No, I was just going to say, Henry, and contributing to an idea that Gregory talked about, the Friday lunch. I mean, that's it, isn't it? You're making some experiences that might be available on a Monday or a Friday that are not available on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or making sure that bigger meetings, team meetings, through technology, are bookable on certain days as well. So there's a lot of nudge behavior that you can do, campaigns, if you like, to change behavior without it being draconian, because I'm not sure that works, and certainly that would clash with a lot of companies' culture.
Yeah, no, very, very good point. Very similar to what I was going to add. You mentioned there about, for example, the sales and marketing collaboration. It makes a heck of a lot of sense that you want them to talk to each other on some days. And how have you, that's a perfect example, how have you implemented that policy? You mentioned there about the why, and how was it taken by the sales and marketing team in that instance?
So we are still, at least in our Toronto office, still figuring out how we're going to go back in. We're actually moving into a new office, which is kind of sounds counterintuitive to think that we have had this empty one for a year, and we actually need more office even to do the flex working now. And we've been managing this through kind of regularly checking in with every single person at the company and asking them, how do you feel about your home setup? Do you have what you need? what do you miss about the office? What do you want to use the office for when you come back? And we're seeing how people's feelings on this have evolved over time. I think we all thought last spring that this would be a little more short-lived. And it was like, well, you know, my office chair isn't great, but it's fine. But by August or September, it's like, you need a real office chair. It's time. And so we've been, you know, connecting with everyone in the company and asking them, and then kind of communicating back and saying, here for everyone to see, here's the summary of what everybody here is thinking, so that you can see actually, you know, of our whole company, there's only 2 people who want to be fully remote, which is maybe not what somebody else would have thought. And so that we can show the data points that we're using as leadership to make these decisions. And also being flexible. Again, what works in September may not work in January, and we may need to evolve and change that. And I think we've all had some forced flexibility put on us in the last year anyways, so we should be experts at it now.
Definitely agree to that. Yeah, flexible flex working in terms of how to change as well. I think it's an additional flex on the flex. That's good to hear. And yeah, you mentioned there as well, you touched upon it, asking your team, asking the company, asking the employees, how do you feel right now? What's going on? I don't know if everybody's done that across the panel today, but has that been something you've done constantly? Is that something that you did every quarter? Of course, nobody guessed that it was going to be this long. So initially, but how did you go about that in terms of your organizations? Otherwise,
so, you know, from a line management perspective, it's on a daily basis that you're touching point. From an official sort of monitoring, it's a quarterly survey engagement touch point to really get to the bottom of how people feel, and that's critical. From a return to work, it's a much more in-depth interview process to understand how employees are going to be using the spaces when they come back, because one of the most interesting days I spent in the last 6 months was visiting some offices in London and seeing how quickly they had dated in the space of 12 months. It was just extraordinary. It just hit me. If I'd gone to these offices 12 months earlier, I would have thought, you know, they're in line with what you'd expect in a workplace. Maybe there was a little coffee station and some bits and pieces that had been put into sort of thrills, let's call them, for employees. But 12 months later, you walked in and you thought, people will not come back to this space. So there's a big emphasis, I think, on redesign of space. And before you do that, or in parallel, you need to be engaging with your workforce to make sure that you understand the user journeys that will be overlaid with that workspace, so that you can collaborate and build the right space for your company's culture. And no one model will fit all companies. You imagine if you're in the financial services sector, will be very different from the pharmaceutical sector. So you do need to take that into account. But those are a more in-depth process of engagement that isn't solved with a survey. You know, that's a conversation with a specialist who's able to help get to the bottom of what it is that you're looking to achieve from your workplace in the future.
Very nice, nicely put. And that kind of leads me on to a next point, which I think we're kind of all getting to it, right? Is you want your employees, you want your team to have the choice of whatever it is that they want, whether it's fully working from home, whether it's coming into the office every now and again, whether it's fully coming into the office as Ria is doing right now and ready to do. And I have to say, I'm very similar in that approach. But what is the right balance? How, and I think, Mark, you touched upon it as well, and Ria, you've mentioned flexibility on top of the flexibility. How do you find that right balance, and how do you make sure that, yeah, the team, the company, they're happy with what they're doing, and they're happy with going into the office or not?
is just treating this as a continual process, and not that we are going to make this plan once and then that's it. It's going to be revisited. And again, like as other areas have opened up, for example, we have an office in Denver, and in Denver, there are no masks. Everyone's just back, and it just opened, which is not at all what we had seen in Australia, for example, where things are kind of opening and closing, or here where we've mostly just been closed. And I think it's that, just to add flexibility on flexibility on flexibility, is that, you know, the only way to prepare for this is to at least ensure that the processes you're putting in place, the technologies that you are putting in place, can allow you to be nimble and be flexible. Because the last year has showed us that, you know, how many times have we all done a return to office plan now? And we're like pretty sure that this one is going to be it. But if it's not, how are we ensuring that at least the way we're approaching it, the tools we are using, can allow us to still manage whatever comes? And I think that from the technology space, and this bringing more and more technology into the workplace, be that in commercial real estate buildings or in offices themselves, that flexibility is going to be critical. Because had we gone and, you know, hard coded in a solution a year ago, it would not be relevant now, and we'd be back in the same place we were before.
Absolutely, it's iterative. It's just so important that you have the right technology foundation that gives you that agility. So it doesn't matter if it's 400 or 1,500. There is a window of opportunity right now that organizations cannot miss. You know, it is this expectation from their workforce. They know that when they come back to work, things will change. And this is your window to implement the way you go about that change. And I think if you miss it, the exercise becomes 10 times harder, because human beings, by their very nature, are not programmed for change. It's uncomfortable, as we've all felt for the last 12 months. But you have that goodwill and willingness over the next few months, I think, with your workforce, to have these discussions and make the changes, pick the right platforms that will help you react month to month or week to week if you have to, depending on the situation in the city or in the state or in the country that's unfolding.
And I think you need two ingredients to make it work: trust and flexibility. You need to trust your employees. So you cannot make those old jokes people used to do when someone leaves at 4. Oh, good afternoon. You were leaving. You know, that those type of jokes.
Yep.
This is over. You know, you have to trust the team, and you have to give flexibility to everyone to work the way they want, knowing that sometimes, especially in a global organization with offices in multiple continents, sometimes you have to take a call at an inconvenient time for you, to the benefit of the flexibility of the other party, and vice versa. But these two are the key success factor, and of course adaptability down the road, but always trust and always flexibility. If not, it will not work.
And touch on that, because it's really interesting. You know, old habits die hard, don't they? And one of the challenges we certainly have in UK culture is, even when you have the flu, you get into that office because you wanted to show everybody your commitment. And this will become completely socially unacceptable. And
stay home.
Stay home.
We do have a case of that actually in the US team at the moment. Somebody's feeling a little ill, unfortunately, and the other members are saying, could you actually stay at home even though it's the week-long kind of get together? It's really interesting to see that. I mean, that wouldn't have been heard of a year ago, right? It's got a bit of a sniffle, and now it's something that we see is maybe it's okay if you stay at home today instead, and it does change things a lot, I think, and yeah, the oh, it's 4 o'clock, good afternoon, enjoy the rest of your day, things like that. It's just not going to work with the flexibility that we will now need to allow to do it.
I also wonder what will happen to the suit and the tie. I mean, we in the tech world, of course, we dropped that a long time ago. But when I started my career, I dressed up to go to the office. But as both are merging, for organizations still asking people to dress with a suit and a tie. I mean, this is how are they going to do it with a mix of office and homework, working from home? I think that's the end of it as well. The end. You're merging. You've got one person only, and this person is sometimes in the office, sometimes at home, but it's one person. While we used to be two persons, sort of, or office person and or home person.
I love my colourful ties, Gregory. I'm not chucking them in the bin for you and your technology acquaintances.
You're ready.
I know I am wearing a t-shirt right now, but I miss like office clothes.
Yeah,
there was a level of flexibility, especially in like the stretch pants department, that our director of finance, it took him until the fall, but he was wearing a button-down white dress shirt every day. And one day we're like, surely he'll get, and it happened at some point in the fall. We have to go back and find the exact date, but it did. But since as things are starting to reopen, I personally am excited for,
That's an interesting one that I hadn't really thought of. I mean, we're used to wearing other forms of clothing nowadays. The sweatpants are the typical thought of our 9-to-5 Zoom meetings. Do you think there's going to be need for a policy to be like, you're going to need to wear something a little smarter, or do you think?
Yeah, there is a bit of a risk. You're right. There's a bit of a risk that people will come to the office like they're going to the beach. So
I think people are adults, and there'll be some social norms that we'll all start to fall back into. But we some of the clients we work with are definitely not a tech startup. They're humongous global corporations, and they would always be excited when we come to a meeting. They're like, "Oh, you're wearing jeans. I wish we could wear jeans." And they're like, they'd be upset if they're like, "Well, why aren't you wearing jeans today?" And it's like, "Okay, I will remember for you to." And I think it'll be different depending on the type of organization.
And remember that a lot of people do take comfort in knowing what the dress code is. By the way, people do like to have some guidance or communication on it, so they don't feel like they stand out or get it wrong, or maybe they're brand new to your company. We're talking about this. How many employees have joined your company and never been with you, so they don't know when they walk in that office what everybody's getting. So it can also remove some anxiety, I would say, if HR was to look at this and make some efforts to draft a loose policy. I think it would help reduce anxiety.
So you will put your tie and your suit on.
My tie will be on, regardless of what HR say. If they outlaw it, it will still be on. They can fire me.
I have to say, you touched upon a second point, because obviously I was thinking about coming into my own office, but you're also talking about coming into a client's office. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have been reprimanded by somebody in this lovely panel for wearing Stan Smiths to a client's meeting.
Well, it was unacceptable. You shouldn't have worn that.
Who could that be? We should fire him.
many years ago. Not that harshly reprimanded, I have to say. But it's an interesting point to bring up. Is there going to be? I mean, I have to say, I personally, I'm used to mostly doing my client meetings on Zoom, even prior to the remote working over the past year and a bit. But do you think that also adapts the people actually visiting, and kind of they might need to think about another level of maybe I should wear a nice tie in some cases.
Yeah, I think if these larger organizations can go fully remote for a year, surely they can go beyond casual Friday once a month, possibly. But for us, and in the past, when we were doing a lot more in-person interaction with our customer, it always depended. We could be doing a site visit with engineers, and you're going through a whole office complex, and that's a very different outfit than if you're in the, you know, corporate office going to a global all hands meeting. And, you know, you always kind of dress for the occasion. At Lane, our very first of our core values is to come as you are. So, you know, we don't want to make anyone feel really uncomfortable by forcing them to wear a tie. I don't think we have any tie wearers in the company.
What is going on?
It's anarchy over here.
What is happening to this world?
But
with a Lane logo, you should have ties with Lane logo made up.
I'll talk to our marketing team about the next. I think we got sweatpants coming, just on the opposite end of the spectrum. But, you know, and it's the idea of to dress for the occasion, and to, it's going to be exactly like going back to the office, one of those things to feel out. The same with business travel. We're waiting to see how that returns. And just as we think about going into the office with a purpose, going to visit a customer on site, you know, with a purpose, that may change as well. And I think, at least for us, it's going to be very directed by our customers and what they're comfortable with and what their needs are, rather than dictated by Lane in that case.
Yeah, I mean, and even beyond dress code, I mean, it's making sure your visitors, your guests to your office feel comfortable. They know what to expect. They know what the safety protocols are before they arrive. You know, that throughout their stay, they feel safe, secure, looked after. But also, again, that there's an experience element, isn't there? We're not just talking about employees returning to work. It's also them being able to bring their customers and their clients and their suppliers and their partners, etc., back to that environment as well. And how's that going to change? What's their user journey going to be like through that space?
Exactly. I mean, that's a whole other topic of discussion, I think, and we could keep on going for hours. I have to say, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today has been policy, the psychological, the mental side of things as well for returning back to work. We have touched upon it multiple times, but you know, how are we actually getting these people back to work in terms of yes, we allow for flexibility. I think all of us are in unison saying tech definitely needs to support that. How do we make sure that the tech is utilized and actually, used by the individual, the employee, and make sure that they don't feel like it's a hindrance, but actually a benefit for them to actually come into these fantastic offices that will give us Monday and Friday lunches. I'm holding you to that, Gregory, now. And you know, rather than, I need to go through an extremely long process to book my desk, who's there, everything like that. How do we make that not a hindrance and actually a benefit for the employee?
It goes back to the technology choice and making sure that the technology you're choosing is flexible, and I'm going to remove friction. Those are those two words I just combined there. And you know, also looking at this as an experience from the point of view of, you know, that the person coming into the office, whether they work there or whether they are a visitor, and looking at it from that angle and that lens, and making sure that it's going to work for them. You know, it's also important that for visitor management, for example, the building and the security team can understand who's in the building, when are they in the building. But ultimately, the experience of moving in and out of this space is most important for that individual. And I think focusing on them, and then really, again, picking the right technology partners is going to be the key there.
And to break down silos, you know, if we believe that the future workplace, however that looks, if we believe that it's going to need to be connected, agile, and integrated, you can't get yourself in a situation where one department in isolation picks your access control system, one department, you know, picks your employee benefits, one department picks the food and the cleaning, and suddenly you end up, you know, with a hodgepodge of systems that don't talk to each other, that don't flow, that teams can't access. So you mentioned security, you know, multiple teams are now going to need to access similar data sources and share data. For example, whoever's got the access control data needs to tell the other service lines how many people are in the building, because it changes how you clean, how you protect the building, how much HVAC do you need, how much food should you prepare. So this has been another huge change in the future workplace, this access and sharing of data and information across teams, and to break these silos and not let people hold on to it and lock it down because its purpose is next to useless in isolation.
Absolutely. And it's looking at it as an ecosystem.
Yes.
It's not a bunch of siloed teams or groups or individuals or stakeholders. It's a whole ecosystem, and it's only when that is connected all the way through that it will work, or else, you can't make a solution one off in one location. You lose the opportunity to get those best practices, to understand, what's working in another market or another country.
And the barriers are all internal. They're all internal to this. It can all be solved quite easily if teams are ready to collaborate together and overcome, historic barriers that we erect to protect the area that we're looking after.
So a last question there that might be a difficult one before we have to conclude today's session. Who's actually in charge then?
In charge of
returning to work. You mentioned a whole number of departments that it relates to, that are involved in the process. Who's the person or people that need to take the return to work forward within a company?
I think we've addressed at the company level. What we're seeing more and more of is the idea of there are people dedicated to workplace experience. That is a role that has just grown dramatically over the last year. Even our own at Lane, our office manager is a million times more than just an office manager, especially in the last year. She's responsible for that workplace experience, and and thinking, how do our team members do a COVID screener? How are we approaching this? And every company is going to need to think about that going forward. I think that the decisions are driven by the individuals. That's the only way you're going to make the right decisions. But it's also a collective responsibility between the offices and the buildings. It is, when you think about an office building, the building team, the property management team, facilities team kind of can assist and support and put in best practices right up until that office door. And then the internal of the office is on the company. So it has to be collaborative in that sense, or else you're going to have a half of an experience. You're going to have a wonderful experience in the lobby and in your shared spaces, and then maybe not in your office, or vice versa.
Yeah, I agree. It's cross-functional. It's HR, it's brand and comms, it's facilities, it's real estate, it's IS&T, it's workplace, it's security. I mean, it has never needed so many stakeholders to come together as a forum to make sure that people return to work safely, productively, but also in the new dynamic that the company wants them to work in, which then ultimately should end up in the C-suite. It's that important. It all comes down to attracting, retaining, managing talent.
Yeah, that's a great conclusion, Mark.
I think it's a fantastic conclusion. I think as we are out of the hour, I really think that we can conclude today's session. So that was really nicely concluded, I think, by yourself, Mark. And I think if we all agree, it's up to everybody in the organization across the board, basically, to make sure that the new return to work is successful. How do we make it work? Perhaps unsurprisingly, I think tech came up quite a few times to make sure that we can help and assist to make sure that everything is as easy as possible for the employee and for the company to manage that return into the office. Policies, obviously, also extremely important to have. But to quote Mark, not be draconian about it, of course. Policies need to be and to quote Ria, very flexible, and put flexibility on top of flexibility to make sure that you can change those policies over time as needed. As many of you mentioned, we've made multiple return to work strategies, I think, over the past year, and many companies have made their multiple return to work strategies over the past year. So making sure that that is ability to change and make sure that our offices are becoming a destination for our employees first and foremost, a place where they want to be and not that they want to avoid any longer. So I think that's really what came out of this session, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So thanks to you all for your time today, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you, Henry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, guys.